You shouldn't look at me like that. That's what she said the first time our silence got too heavy. Her voice low, not scolding, not playful, just a tremor caught between warning and confession. I remember the way her eyes flicked to mine and then away, as if holding my gaze would have given something away neither of us was ready to say. I should have looked down. I should have laughed it off, said something careless, boyish. Instead, the words slipped out before I could stop them. Then stopped looking back. The room was quiet enough that I heard my own heartbeat after. Quiet enough that her breath sounded louder than it should have. She was sitting across from me at her dining table, a glass of wine cradled in her hand, though she hadn't taken a sip in minutes. I'd come over because she said she hated eating alone. I told myself that was all it was. A favor, a neighborly thing, nothing more. But watching her then, her hair loosely pinned, a strand falling free against her cheek, the way her sweater slipped just enough to show the curve of her collarbone, I knew that wasn't the truth. I wasn't here for the food. She leaned back slowly, as if putting space between us might steady something inside her. But her eyes betrayed her, glancing toward me again, softer this time, curious, almost afraid of what she'd find. I caught myself gripping my fork tighter than necessary. My hand brushed against hers once when we both reached for the salt, and she didn't pull away as quickly as she could have. Just that small contact, her fingers warm, smooth, steady, was enough to unravel me in ways I didn't want to admit. The clock ticked on the wall, each second dragging. Outside, the wind moved the branches against the window, a faint scraping sound like restless fingers. Inside, everything felt too close, too still. "You're quiet tonight," she said at last, her voice softer than before. I shrugged. I don't want to say the wrong thing. She tilted her head, the corner of her mouth curling just slightly. And what would that be? I almost told her that every time she spoke, I found myself memorizing the way her lips shaped the words, that the scent of her perfume lingered even after she left the room, and I caught myself breathing it in as if it were something forbidden. That being near her felt like standing too close to a fire, dangerous, but impossible to step back from. Instead, I said nothing. Just let the pause stretch between us until it was thick enough to feel like a touch in itself. She looked at me again, longer this time. And that was when I saw it, the tiniest fracture in her careful composure. Regret, maybe, or recognition, as if she'd been here before, years ago, but hadn't expected to be again. Her wineglass sat untouched, my plate half finished. Neither of us moved. It would have been easy to laugh, to break the tension, to remind her of the age between us, the line that should never blur. But I didn't, and she didn't either. When her hand brushed mine again, whether by accident or something more deliberate, she let it linger half a second longer. Just enough. The air shifted. My chest tightened. Her eyes lowered, then lifted back to mine with a sharpness that felt like surrender and defiance at once. And just when I thought she might say something more, when my throat tightened with words I couldn't risk, the sharp sound of a knock at the door broke through the quiet. She froze. Our eyes locked. Neither of us moved. The knock at her door passed quickly, just a neighbor dropping off some misdelivered mail. Nothing important. But by the time she closed the door and came back to the table, the air between us felt changed, like something had been interrupted that we weren't sure we'd get back. She sat down again, slower this time, fingers smoothing the edge of her sweater like she needed to remind herself to stay composed. I tried to eat another bite, but the food had gone cold, and so had my appetite. Her eyes caught mine, then darted away. "You know," she said, almost too casually, "I didn't used to let people in like this." "Like this?" I asked. She gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "Dinner. Talking. Letting someone see me outside of, well, outside of the roles people expect me to play." I wanted to ask what role she meant, but I didn't. She was a woman who had lived a whole life before I ever stepped into hers. Marriage, maybe. Heartbreak, probably. Things that weighed on her in the silences she didn't fill. Instead, I just nodded. "I like seeing you like this." Her expression flickered, something vulnerable, quickly hidden behind a sip of wine. She set the glass down carefully, as though buying time. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because people talk. Because I'm—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "Because it's not simple." I didn't push. I didn't have to. The truth sat there, unspoken. The years between us, the questions it would raise, the weight of being seen together in ways that couldn't be explained away. but I couldn't stop noticing. The way her hand rested close to mine on the table, knuckles brushing whenever she shifted. The faint crease at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, a softness that made her seem even more beautiful than when she held herself in perfect control. The way her breath touched my cheek when she leaned in to reach for the salt, close enough that my chest tightened before she pulled back again. "You're quiet again," she said, tilting her head at me, eyes sharp, searching. "I'm trying not to stare," I admitted before I could stop myself. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak right away. She only looked at me. Too long, too steady. Then she let out a breath, slow, deliberate. "You noticed too much." Maybe she meant it as a warning. Maybe she wanted me to deny it. But I didn't. The silence stretched, heavy, charged. Then, almost without thinking, I reached for her hand. Not fully, not boldly, just enough for my fingers to graze hers. She didn't pull away. She let them rest there, the smallest, simplest contact. Her hand was warm. Her skin soft. She didn't look down, didn't acknowledge it. She just sat there, eyes locked on mine, as if the stillness itself was the answer to every question neither of us dared to ask. Later that week, I found myself at her place again. I told myself it was casual. She'd asked if I could help move a few boxes from the spare room. Nothing more. But standing there in her living room, sleeves rolled up, sweat dampening the back of my neck, it felt anything but casual. She was close. Too close. Guiding me with a hand on my arm, steadying a box with her palm pressed against mine longer than necessary. "You always show up when I need help," she said, smiling faintly, though her voice carried something heavier. I shrugged, shifting the weight of the box. Maybe I just like being here. Her eyes lingered on me a second too long. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. The sound made her flinch. She grabbed it quickly, glanced at the screen, and turned it face down without answering. I caught the name, someone I didn't know, but the tightness in her jaw said enough. Someone from her world, someone who wouldn't understand if they knew I was here, standing in her home like this. "You should probably." I started, but stopped when I saw the way her shoulders stiffened, the way she shook her head. "Not important," she said. Too quickly. The silence after stretched thin. I set the box down. She was already watching me again, eyes dark, guarded. "People would talk," I said softly, echoing her earlier words. She stepped closer, almost without meaning to. "They always do." I didn't breathe. Not when her hand brushed my shoulder, light but deliberate. Not when she moved past me to set something on the table, her sleeve grazing mine. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. I turned, and she was right there, inches away. Her breath touched my cheek. My chest rose too fast. My throat tightened with words I couldn't risk. Her eyes flicked down to my mouth, just for a second. I leaned in, just slightly, just enough for the possibility to exist. My hand lifted, hovering, not quite touching her face. The sound of the front door opening shattered it. A voice called from the hallway, her friend, dropping something off. We jerked apart, both too quickly. She stepped back, brushing her hair behind her ear, her face composed but her breathing uneven. I stuffed my hands into my pockets, pulse racing. Her friend appeared, smiling, oblivious. "Didn't know you had company." She covered smoothly, thanking them, taking the bag they handed over. I said nothing. My throat was still tight with what almost happened. When the door shut again, the silence between us returned, louder than before. She turned slowly, eyes locking on mine. No words, just that same pull, undeniable, dangerous. I didn't move away. Neither did she. And though the kiss never came, we stood there in the charged stillness, closer than we'd ever been. Both of us knowing the line we hadn't yet crossed was already gone. It happened late, after everyone else had gone to bed. I'd stayed to help her clean up, plates stacked, glasses rinsed, the kind of quiet chores that stretch longer than they should when no one really wants them to end. She was drying a dish when she spoke, her back to me. "Do you ever wonder what people would say?" The question froze me where I stood. "About what?" She turned, towel in her hands, eyes sharper than her voice. "This. Us. You being here all the time. The way you look at me." I swallowed hard, heat rushing to my chest. "You notice." How could I not? Her voice cracked, softer now. "You stare like I'm something you shouldn't want." I took a step closer before I realized I'd moved. Maybe I shouldn't, but I do. The towel slipped from her hands, forgotten on the counter. She didn't move back. Her breath hitched, barely audible, and for the first time she didn't try to hide it. "You're too young," she whispered, shaking her head. But her body betrayed her, shoulders drawn tight, lips parted, like she was waiting for me to close the space. I lifted my hand slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. My fingers lingered against her temple, light, trembling. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, leaning into the touch as though she hated herself for needing it. "Tell me to leave," I said quietly, my voice too close to her ear. "And I will." Her eyes opened, glistening, searching mine for something neither of us could name. She didn't say it. She didn't tell me to leave. Instead, she stepped closer, her hands resting on the counter behind her as if to steady herself. My chest nearly touched hers. The scent of her perfume rose between us, warm, steady, the kind of detail that would haunt me if I walked away. "You don't understand," she murmured, voice breaking. "I've lived through mistakes that still follow me. I can't afford another one." "Then don't call me a mistake." Her lips parted in shock, her breath brushing my mouth with every word she didn't say. My hand slipped lower, cupping her jaw, thumb grazing her cheekbone. "You're making this impossible," she whispered. "No." I breathed, leaning closer, so close my nose brushed hers. "You're the one who keeps looking back." Her eyes flicked down, one heartbeat, two. And then, a sharp knock at the window. A neighbor's voice outside, calling her name through the glass. We froze, inches apart. Her breath caught, my hand still cradling her face. She turned toward the sound, but only barely. Then back to me. The moment wasn't gone. If anything, it was sharper, unbearable. "We can't keep," she whispered, voice frayed. But she didn't finish, because neither of us had stepped away. The neighbor finally walked away that night, but the damage had been done. The fragile thread we'd been walking snapped. I left quickly, without saying the things pressed against my throat. The next day, I promised myself I wouldn't go back, that I'd keep the distance she clearly needed. But she was the one who called. Her voice over the phone was soft, guarded. "Can you stop by? Just for a minute." When I stepped into her house, she was pacing the living room, arms folded, jaw tight. Something was different, less polished, less controlled. "They asked me about you," she said abruptly. I blinked. "Who?" "My sister. She saw us together last week. She asked why you're always here." The words hung heavy. My chest tightened, not from guilt, but from the raw panic in her voice. "And what did you say?" She hesitated. Her hands trembled as she pushed her hair back, but she wouldn't look at me. I lied. "I told her you were just helping with things around the house. That you're kind. That's all." Her voice cracked on "that's all." I stepped closer. "And that's not all." Her eyes lifted, finally meeting mine. Anger flickered there, but it wasn't for me. It was for herself. "Don't you see? If anyone finds out, they'll think, I don't care what they think." "You should." She moved past me sharply, her shoulder brushing mine. The contact jolted through me, hotter than her words. She stopped at the window, clutching the curtain as though she needed it to steady herself. I followed, slower, until I was close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body. She stiffened but didn't step away. "Why does it scare you so much?" I asked quietly. Her voice broke into a whisper. "Because I've thought about it too. About what it would mean. About how easy it would be to." She stopped, her breath hitching. I moved closer, my hand almost touching her back before I caught myself. "To what?" Her fingers clutched the fabric tighter. When she turned, her face was inches from mine. I could see the shimmer of unshed tears in her eyes, the way her lips trembled though she said nothing. "I've already crossed too many lines in my life," she whispered. "But this would undo me." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone in this undoing, that I was already too far gone to step back. Instead, I said nothing, just stood there, breath shallow, as the space between us thinned to almost nothing. Her hand brushed mine as she lowered it from the curtain, trembling, deliberate. We didn't kiss. We didn't speak. But in that moment, standing so close, every breath shared, we both knew there was no going back. She pulled in a shuddering breath, then whispered, almost to herself, "Then maybe we shouldn't fight it anymore." The house was quiet when I came over again, too quiet, as though she'd been waiting. The curtains were drawn, the air still. She didn't ask why I was there. She didn't send me away either. We stood in the kitchen, not moving, not speaking, just looking. Her arms were crossed at first, defensive, but her eyes betrayed her, dark, restless, aching. My hands were shoved into my pockets, but I couldn't stop shifting closer, as if some current pulled me in. Finally, she spoke. If we do this, there's no taking it back. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, trembling even though she tried to keep it steady. I know. She shook her head. You don't. You're too young to know what it means to carry regret. I stepped forward, slowly, until I could feel the heat of her body through the air between us. My voice dropped. And you're too used to running from what you want. Her breath caught. She didn't move away. I lifted a hand, hesitated, then brushed my fingers along her jaw. She closed her eyes, leaning into the touch like it hurt to be touched so gently. My thumb grazed her cheek, and I felt the faint tremor that rippled through her. I can't, she began, but the word broke apart. Yes, you can. My forehead almost touched hers now. Our breaths mingled, uneven. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The world seemed suspended in that fragile silence. Her hand rose slowly, almost unwillingly, and pressed against my chest. My heart thudded beneath her palm, too fast, too loud. Her eyes opened, searching mine, and in them I saw everything she'd tried to hide. Fear, longing, regret, desire. Tell me to leave, I whispered again. She shook her head, her lips parting. I can't. And that was it. The last barrier fell. I closed the space between us, not in some sudden, perfect moment, but in a messy, desperate collision of everything we'd been holding back. Her hands clutched at my shoulders, pulling me in as though she hated herself for it, loved herself for it. My fingers tangled in her hair, sliding against the warmth of her neck. The kiss wasn't soft. It wasn't careful. It was years of regret meeting the fire of restless youth. It was unsteady, trembling, but real. When we finally pulled apart, her breath shuddered against my lips. She rested her forehead against mine, eyes closed, voice breaking. God help me. I wanted this. I held her face in my hands, steadying her. You don't need saving from me. Her eyes opened then, and for the first time, she didn't look afraid. She looked seen, and I understood, so did she, that whatever came next, we'd cross the line together. The night stretched quiet after our kiss, the kind of quiet that usually means something has gone wrong. But this time it was different. It wasn't silence heavy with restraint. It was the stillness of two people finally giving up the fight. She sat down on the couch first, pulling her sweater tighter around her shoulders, as though she could hide the shiver running through her. I followed, not too close, not at first. But she looked at me, the faintest smile tugging at her lips, and patted the cushion beside her. I sat, close enough that our knees brushed. For a long moment, we didn't speak, just breathed together. Her hand rested loosely on her lap until, almost without thinking, I reached for it. She hesitated, then let our fingers intertwine. Her palm was warm, steady, her thumb brushing lightly against mine in a slow, unconscious rhythm. I should be smarter than this, she whispered, her eyes fixed on our joined hands. You're not making a mistake, I said. Her lips curved, not quite a smile, not quite denial. You don't know that. I leaned closer, my shoulder against hers now, my voice low. Then let me prove it. She turned to look at me, and I saw the battle in her eyes. The regret she'd carried for years, the fear of what others might say, and the fragile hope she hadn't dared to touch until now. And for the first time, she didn't turn away. Instead, she leaned in, resting her forehead against mine. It wasn't another kiss. It was quieter, deeper, a surrender in its own way. I don't want to be alone anymore, she admitted, her voice breaking. Then don't be, I whispered back. Her eyes glistened, but she smiled, soft, genuine, unguarded. She shifted closer until her head rested against my shoulder, her body relaxing into mine. My arm wrapped around her naturally, protectively, as though it had always belonged there. We stayed like that, not rushing, not speaking, just letting the warmth between us sink in. The world outside could say what it wanted. For now, it was only us, the quiet, the closeness, the feel of her hand in mine. I pressed a kiss to her forehead, lingering there. She sighed, content, her hand tightening around mine as though she didn't want to let go. And I knew, we both knew, that whatever complications waited, this moment was ours. Not regret, not fear, just two people finally choosing each other. The clock ticked softly in the background, the night holding us in its steady embrace. For the first time since all of this began, the silence between us felt safe. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?